Hello and welcome to more of this. Imperialism and neocolonialism is a real thing. Main points. That was then. In the old days, European armies used to go in and take over less developed lands. European governments used to set up colonial governments in the invaded lands and run the colonies in the interests of the European countries, rather than for the benefit of the local people. Local people were coerced into living lives that they had no say in. Local cultures were often brutally suppressed and new languages were often forced on these people. Resources were extracted and sent back to the European countries, enriching the European countries, for the most part enriching the elites in those countries rather than the ordinary people there. Local economies and agriculture were uprooted, sending great swathes of the population into poverty. These people were then ripe to be exploited for cheap labour. Imperialism/colonialism was completely undemocratic. It was imposed on people without their consent. There were some benefits. Some people gained access to healthcare and education from which they benefited, and infrastructure was developed such as railways. But, for the most part, people became poorer, and people were not allowed to control over their own natural resources, which were expropriated, i.e. stolen, and shipped back to Europe for the benefit of European elites. The locals had no say in what the British or French or the Belgians or the Romans, for that matter, did to them. Human rights abuses were widespread, including massacres. Imperialism/colonialism was a theft of freedom and culture and economic resources. Imperialism/colonialism was delivered down the barrel of a gun. That was then. This is now. Nowadays, economic domination of the Third World by the First World continues. We no longer run their countries for them. We delegate that to local elites. But we have the economic system sewn up so that they are sending us cheap natural resources while we exploit them in sweatshops. The system is rigged. They still owe us unpayable debts, which in many cases were accrued undemocratically, illegitimately, or through manipulation. Germany had unpayable debts from World War I, but these were cancelled. Third world countries don't have the legal clout to get a proper debt cancellation deal. Thus, they still supposedly owe us money. After all the abuse they have suffered at the hands of our governments and businesses, the idea that our countries are owed anything by them is laughable. But we use these debts as an instrument of coercion to keep them serving our interests. Policies are imposed on third world governments by the World Bank and IMF and WTO. These policies allow Western businesses to do business on their own terms and prevent poor countries from investing adequately in education and healthcare, and also stops them from protecting their economies during the industrialization phase, something which was crucial to our own development in Europe, the USA, and all of the developed world. Our governments have got the third world in economic chains for the benefit of our corporations, which profit from exploiting the third world to enrich their bosses and shareholders. Who are the shareholders? Aren't they the general public? No. They are overwhelmingly the 1%. The rich elite own the overwhelming majority of shares. So in summary, imperialism and colonialism have continued, but through a subtler mechanism. We rarely use force now. It's all about economic institutions. And this is done for the benefit of Western corporations whose profits are shared overwhelmingly by the very richest sections of society in the West. A word on the use of military force, as that does still come into it. Sometimes we still use it. Iraq, for example. We didn't set up a formal colony when we invaded Iraq and defeated the Iraqi army, but we did set up what was effectively a puppet regime. They now have elections, but as in all poor countries, the government has a very limited policy range because we've got it stitched up so that they have to follow the policies which benefit Western corporations rather than the people of Iraq. For the most part, however, it is the threat of force which is used to back up economic imperialism. The USA has military bases all over the world. Talk softly and carry a big stick. A supposedly free country which hosts an imperial garrison knows it can only step so far out of line before it will be whipped back into line. There is also a big difference in diplomatic clout between countries which have nuclear weapons and those which don't. If you have them, this will give you a huge boost to your terms of trade with other countries, and this is largely their real purpose. If Iran ever gets nukes, it'll get a much better price for its oil, just as an example. In summary, imperialism/neocolonialism is a real thing, and it goes without saying that it's unethical and undemocratic and not in the interests of the people of the world. Is it even in the interests of the rich? I think not really. It's in their short-term, material interests. But short-term materialism doesn't make you happy. Enlightened self-interest means realising that to be happy, you don't have to fuck other people over. You don't have to lie and steal and maim and kill. And you don't have to dominate other people or destroy the environment. That's it.